Hello and welcome back. This episode of biology, we're going to talk about speciation. We've talked about natural selection and how we can get these new phenotypes and how the allele frequencies can go up and down. This time we're going to talk about speciation. One species becoming another new species. How is this coming about? To do that, first thing we need to do in order to understand this is, well, what is a species? If you look it up, there are many different types, many different definitions for a species. The definition I'm going for is this one: organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. If they have those two, if they can mate and produce fertile offspring, they're considered to be the same species. You get that check. And the example I give is the donkey and the horse makes the mule, which is sterile, so their donkey and the horse are considered to be different species. I honestly don't know how other definitions of species treat it, but that's how I go about it. So, if you look at a flower, a plant, different kingdoms, but a plant can't mate with a donkey. That's ridiculous. You'd get like a ponky or a planky or a plant. They can't mate. Right? If the pieces don't work, different species. So those two requirements: mating and producing fertile offspring. If you can do that, then you're in the same species. All right, that being said, let's move on. All right, so how is this going to happen? Speciation itself requires mainly, I think if you look at it, mainly it's all about reproductive isolation. You go back to our definition about mating and producing fertile offspring. It's really about reproduction. Right? If you can't mate for whatever reason, then you are going to isolate and ultimately become a different species. And there are many different ways that this can come about. There are prezygotic barriers, and that is before fertilization, and there are some post-zygotic barriers that happen after fertilization. Like the prezygotic barriers would be, some sort of mating ritual or whatnot. Post-zygotic barriers tend to be, the fertilized egg doesn't, dies, or the offspring are weak and they die. Temporal isolation is, actually it should be under here as reproductive isolation, right? Mating at different times. Flowers will flower at different times, producing their pollen, so then they don't end up sending their pollen to, mixing the pollens and fertilizing all the different flowers because they are ripening at different times. The other way for speciation is geographic isolation, but again, this ultimately leads to reproductive isolation. You separate them, they never see each other, they're not reproducing. So that's kind of the basics. Now let's get into a little bit of the specifics, some terms and whatnot. So here we go. Allopatric speciation. I think this is really about geographic isolation we just talked about. So you're speciating and creating a new species after they've been separated. And this is going to happen. So what will happen once you separate? Again, think about this over long periods of time. Kind of like this talk. It's going to be a long, boring talk. So as they are isolated, they develop different mutations. Right? Those mutations lead to new phenotypes. And depending upon the environment, new or different phenotypes will be selected against. Regardless, those new phenotypes, given a long enough period of time, will give you differences. Now, this example is in your textbook. It's a common example. This is in the Grand Canyon. You have the Colorado River, which divided the land, and you have these squirrels on either side that have been classified as different species because they are essentially reproductively isolated. My guess is, and this is kind of where the cheating part of this definition comes in. My guess is, though, if you were to reintroduce them into the same area, they could potentially produce fertile offspring. That's my guess. I'm not an expert on this by no any means. But since they are naturally divided, they're separated, they're reproductive isolated, they are now new different species. So it's kind of the flaw of the speciation's definition, the way things are done, kind of. Another allopatric speciation is, here we have the division of the oceans through through Panama, and over time you then have these two different fish, nice tropical looking fish, the pork fish, interesting name, and then they're different phenotypes. They're now reproductively isolated and considered a new species. Again, the mechanism there, different mutations, new phenotypes, different environmental pressures, gives you a different looking, different kind of animal. And I just, you take it further, maybe you've got a whole different looking, six-armed thing or something. The more complicated way, I think the harder way to understand, is sympatric speciation. And this is just a speciation within the same area. When I see it as two different mechanisms or modes for this to happen. And again, you're reproductively isolating things. The first way, which is a way that is common to some plants, is polyploidy. Polyploidy is when we have an extra set of chromosomes. So normally we're 2N, but in plants, sometimes in meiosis it screws up and you end up with something like 4N or something else. And with plants, they can self-pollinate, so it's not a huge issue necessarily. And over time, that self-pollination can lead to a new species. I found this, which is kind of neat. We have two wild wheats, and supposedly, apparently, that they combined and they formed a new wheat, which is our bread wheat. So this happened just a long time ago. I don't know what the age range of this, but and you can see this would have happened, I don't know, at some point, and it's good that it did. So polyploidy, plants. The other way is resource exploitation. You get a new resource introduced into the environment, and you can a certain segment of that can go and exploit it, kind of like the founder's effect. The classic example here is the maggot fly, which would lay its eggs or eat on the hawthorn apples, but then we had the introduction of the new apples, and a segment of them went off and colonized the apple tree that was non-native to the United States. And over time, since that's a good food source, they just kind of stayed put, and they have not commingled since and have formed a new species, albeit they probably look the same. All right, now the rate of evolution, the speed of evolution. There's two ways to look at it, and then the third thing the College Board wants you to know. Punctuated equilibrium is we have this rapid, very fast spike in evolution after a long period of time, and gradualism is a constant but slow evolution. So you're just, very, very long, millions of years long. Where punctuated equilibrium is, you have this kind of nothing is happening, everything's the same, and then over a very short period of time, boom, you have a very diverse evolution happening. So here we have just kind of pictures to illustrate it. Gradualism, very, very slow, same kind of pattern. You're just slowly going to that different look. And then the punctuated equilibrium, you kind of have this boom. We got this nice orangish one, goes off, but it's very quick after a lull. And then divergent evolution. I was thinking about the anoles and the anole lizard video you watched, and how you have the different lizards that have exploited different resources, have developed these new phenotypes as a result. But divergent evolution is convergent evolution we talked about, where you have similar phenotypes and due to similar environmental pressures over unrelated species. For divergent evolution, we have related species with a diversity of phenotypes, because again, these environmental pressures. This is a poor picture, but the best I could find, and it goes back to the anole lizard, and same basic structure. It's a lizard, it's an anole lizard, but we have this diversity of phenotype, You get the leg size. You got this the color of the flap under their chin. That leads to this divergent evolution. These differences that can lead to different things. All right, that is all I have. I went kind of fast. I do want to say about reproductive isolation. Some of this stuff happens because of maybe different mating rituals or dances, mating calls. All that can lead to this isolation, which is similar to what's happening here. If you remember from the video with the flap, right? That color is what's attracting the mate, and as that changes, you attract different mates, and eventually you can end up with a new species. Anyway, I've said enough. Again, shoot me with any questions you have, and I guess we'll be back tomorrow. Enjoy. See you.